The mining colony of Velriznane sat quietly in the darkness of space, far from the busy centers of the Galactic Union. For 30 years, the small settlement had been home to over 2,000 people from different species across the galaxy. They lived together in peace, working in the deep mines below the surface, pulling out rare crystals that powered ships and technology throughout Union space. The colony was not rich, and it was not famous, but it was home to the miners and their families who had built their lives there among the red rocks and purple skies. Commander Callus had been watching over the colony for 12 years now. He was of Vrinthian, a species known throughout the galaxy for their sharp minds and careful planning. His people had 4 eyes that could see more than most species, and their brains worked in ways that made them natural strategists and planners. Callus had served in the Union Defense Forces for most of his life, and this posting to Velriznane was supposed to be quiet, a place where he could finish his career in peace before retiring to his home world. He sat now in the Defense Command Center, a small room filled with screens and displays that showed everything happening around the colony. His 4 eyes moved across the monitors, checking sensors, watching the empty space around the planet, seeing nothing but the usual patterns of asteroids and dust that drifted through this part of space. The morning shift had just begun, and Callus was drinking his second cup of stimulant tea when the alarms started screaming. His eyes snapped to the main display, and his 2 hearts began beating faster. The sensors were showing 12 ships dropping out of hyperspace, appearing suddenly in the space above the colony. At first, Callus hoped they might be traders or perhaps a Union patrol passing through. But as the computer analyzed the ship designs, his hope died. The distinctive angular hulls and weapon clusters could only belong to one species. The Krell had come to VELR-9. The Krell were raiders and warriors, species that had rejected the peaceful ways of the Galactic Union 300 years ago. They lived for battle and conquest, traveling from system to system, taking what they wanted from colonies that could not defend themselves. They were not interested in trade or diplomacy. They wanted crystals and metals and anything else of value, and they would kill anyone who stood in their way. The Union had tried many times to stop them, sending patrols and building defenses, but the Krell were smart and patient. They struck at weak targets, took what they wanted, and disappeared before help could arrive. Over the years, they had attacked dozens of colonies, and the Union had never been able to catch them or punish them in any meaningful way. Callus looked at his small security force and knew the truth immediately. Velriznane had 20 guards armed with basic weapons designed to keep order among the miners and deal with small problems. The colony had shields, but they were meant to protect against asteroids and radiation, not military-grade weapons. Against 12 Krell warships, each one bristling with plasma cannons and missile launchers, they had no chance at all. This was not going to be a battle. This was going to be a massacre. His communications officer was a young Heptaran female named Zillis. She was fresh out of training, signed to Velriznane because she wanted to see the frontier colonies before taking a position closer to Union Central Space. Her large eyes were wide with fear as she looked at Callus, waiting for orders. The Heptarans were a peaceful species, scholars and artists, not fighters. Zillis had probably never imagined she would be in a situation like this. Callus forced himself to stay calm. Panic would not help anyone. He touched the controls on his console, and his voice echoed through every speaker in the colony. All residents were to evacuate to the underground shelters immediately. This was not a drill. The defense grid powered up, the shields coming online and forming a protective bubble around the colony. It would not hold for long, but it might buy them a few hours. The small security force took up positions at key points, ready to fight even though they all knew how this would end. The first Krell plasma blasts hit the shields like hammer blows. The entire colony shook, and Callus watched the power readings drop on his screens. The shields were holding, but barely. The Krell were not even trying to be clever or tactical. They were just pouring fire into the defenses, knowing that eventually the shields would fail and they could land their troops and take whatever they wanted. Callus turned to Zillis. His voice was steady, showing none of the fear he felt inside. He told her to send a distress signal to broadcast on all Union frequencies, to tell anyone who could hear that Velriznane was under attack and needed immediate help. Zillis worked at her console, her fingers moving quickly across the holographic controls. The signal went out, screaming into space, carrying their desperate plea for rescue. Minutes passed like hours. The Krell bombardment continued, never stopping, never slowing. The shield strength dropped to 80%, then 70, then 60. Fires started breaking out in the northern section of the colony where the shields were weakest. The security teams tried to evacuate those areas, but 3 guards were already dead, caught in the open when a plasma blast punched through a weak spot in the defenses. Callas received casualty reports every few minutes, each one like a knife in his heart. Zillis looked up from her console, her voice shaking. She had received a response to the distress signal. The nearest Union patrol had heard them and was coming to help. Callas felt a moment of hope before she told him the rest. The patrol was 6 days away at maximum speed. They were traveling as fast as they could, but they were simply too far away to help. Callas did the math in his head. The shields would fail in about 6 hours, maybe less, if the Krell concentrated their fire. After that, the colony would be defenseless. The Krell would land their troops, kill anyone who resisted, and take everything of value. Some of the colonists might survive if they surrendered, but the Krell were not known for mercy. Most likely everyone would die. He thought about his life, about all the battles he had studied, all the strategies he had learned. None of it mattered now. There was no clever plan that would save them, no tactical brilliance that could defeat 12 warships with 20 guards and some mining equipment. This was simply the end. The colony continued to shake under the bombardment. Parents held their children in the shelters below, trying to comfort them, trying to tell them everything would be okay even though they knew it was a lie. The miners who had worked so hard to build this place watched their homes burn on the security monitors. Callas stood at his post, coordinating the defense, doing everything he could even though he knew it was hopeless. What none of them knew, what Callas could not possibly have guessed, was that their distress signal had been picked up by another ship. Not a Union patrol, not a merchant vessel. Something different. Something the galaxy had never seen before. Something that was already moving toward them at a speed that would have seemed impossible to anyone in the Galactic Union. Help was coming to Valrus 9. But when it arrived, it would not be what anyone expected. And after it was done, the galaxy would never be quite the same again. The TCS Valkyrie moved through space at a speed that would have amazed most species in the Galactic Union. The human warship was sleek and deadly, its hull painted in the dark colors of Earth's Space Defense Corps. Inside, the crew worked at their stations with the practiced efficiency that came from months of training and drilling. They were on patrol along the border of human territory, mapping new systems and keeping watch for any threats to Earth's colonies. It was routine work, the kind that could become boring after weeks of seeing nothing but empty space and distant stars. Captain Lisa Morgan sat in the command chair at the center of the bridge. She was 34 years old, with brown hair tied back in a regulation bun and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She had joined the Space Corps 12 years ago, working her way up from ensign to captain through skill and determination. Her crew respected her because she was fair but firm, because she made good decisions under pressure, and because she genuinely cared about the people under her command. Right now, she was reading reports from the navigation team, looking at the maps they had made of this sector, making notes about which systems might be worth a closer look. Lieutenant Jake Hayes worked at the communication station to her left. He was a tall man from Texas with an easy smile and quick hands on the controls. He had been monitoring the standard Union frequencies for hours, hearing nothing but the usual chatter of merchant ships and automated beacons. When the distress signal came through, cutting across all other traffic with its urgent priority code, he sat up straight and focused all his attention on the message. His fingers flew across his console, pulling up the details. Analyzing the source and content, he turned to face Captain Morgan, his smile gone and his voice serious. The captain looked up from her reports, immediately reading the tension in his body language. Hayes told her they were picking up a distress signal from a mining colony called Valrus 9. The colony was about 3 light-years from their current position. They were under attack by hostile forces. The message was asking for immediate assistance from any Union ships in range. Morgan set down her datapad and gave Hayes her full attention. She asked what kind of attack. Hayes worked his controls, pulling up more information. He told her there were 12 hostile vessels, and the signatures matched what the Union called the Krell. They were raiders, known for attacking poorly defended colonies. He paused, listening to his headset, then added that the colony was requesting immediate help from any Union forces that could respond. Morgan asked if the Valkyrie was the closest ship. Hayes checked his displays and confirmed it. The nearest Union patrol was 6 days away at their maximum speed. The Valkyrie could reach Valrus 9 in 40 minutes if they pushed their engines to combat velocity. Morgan did not need to think about it for long. Humanity had signed the Mutual Defense Charter when they joined the Galactic Union 8 months ago. That charter said an attack on any Union member was an attack on all members. Beyond that, Morgan had not joined the Space Corps to ignore people who needed help. She had joined to protect people, to make a difference. To stand between danger and the innocent, she gave her orders in a calm, clear voice. Set course for Velrizne at maximum combat speed. All hands to battle stations. She told Hayes to send a message to the colony, to tell them that help was on the way. The bridge came alive with activity. Crew members moved to their battle stations, calling out status reports as systems powered up. The ship's engines changed their tone, going from a steady hum to a deeper roar as they pushed the Valkyrie to speeds that only human ships could safely achieve. Commander Jack Bennett came up from the tactical station below. He was the ship's weapons officer, a veteran who had served in Earth's Navy before transferring to the Space Corps. He was shorter than Morgan, built solid and strong, with gray starting to show in his dark hair. He brought up holographic displays that showed the situation at Valrus 9 based on the sensor data and the distress signal. 12 Krell raiders in attack formation around a lightly defended mining colony. Bennett analyzed the data with the eye of someone who had studied warfare his entire adult life. He told Morgan that the Krell ships were heavily armed, but slow compared to human vessels. Their tactics seemed to rely on overwhelming firepower and the intimidation factor of having superior numbers. They were used to their targets, surrendering or dying quickly. Bennett recommended they hit the Krell hard and fast, using the Valkyrie's speed advantage. The raiders would not expect a single ship to engage 12 of them. That surprise could be their biggest weapon. Morgan listened and agreed. She added that the Galaxy did not expect it either. This would be the first real combat action by a human ship since joining the Union. They would show the Galaxy what Earth brought to the fight. She told Bennett to prepare all weapons and to have firing solutions ready on all targets before they dropped out of hyperspace. She wanted to start shooting the moment they arrived, as the crew prepared for battle. Morgan pulled up everything the Union databases had on the Krell. The information was limited but consistent. The Krell were a warrior species that had rejected the peaceful philosophy of the Galactic Union. They believed that strength gave them the right to take what they wanted from weaker species. For 200 years they had raided colonies on the frontier, and the Union had never found an effective way to stop them. Union ships were designed for exploration and trade, with weapons as an afterthought. Union crews trained for emergencies, but rarely saw real combat. The Krell had learned that Union vessels would usually run rather than fight. And when they did fight, they were easy to defeat. But the Krell had never fought humans before. They did not know that Earth had spent thousands of years in almost constant warfare. They did not know that human ships were designed from the beginning to be weapons of war. Fast and deadly and crewed by people who trained endlessly for combat. They did not know that human history was written in blood and fire. That every tactical innovation and strategic doctrine had been purchased with the lives of soldiers and sailors who learned hard lessons and passed them on to the next generation. The Valkyrie raced through space toward Valrus 9 in the crew quarters. Marines checked their weapons and armor. In engineering, Lieutenant Sarah Webb made sure the reactors were running at peak efficiency and the shields were ready for combat loads. At the helm, Lieutenant Chris Palmer ran through combat maneuvers in his head, preparing for the kind of flying that would test both his skill and the ship's capabilities. Throughout the ship, men and women prepared to do what humans had always done when faced with bullies and raiders. And those who preyed on the weak, they prepared to fight. Not for glory or conquest or treasure. They prepared to fight because people needed help, because a distress signal had been sent, because it was the right thing to do. The Krell were about to learn a lesson that species throughout human history had learned the hard way. You could push humans only so far. You could threaten them and challenge them and think you were stronger. But when you made them angry, when you hurt people they had sworn to protect, they would come for you with everything they had. The countdown timer on the bridge displays showed 30 seconds until they reached Valrus 9. Morgan sat forward in her chair, her hands gripping the armrests. Around her, the crew waited at their stations, ready and focused. Somewhere ahead in the darkness, a colony was dying under Krell guns. But help was coming. It's faster and more dangerous than anything the Krell had ever faced. The timer hit 0, and the Valkyrie dropped out of hyperspace. The shields around Valrisni were dying. Commander Callas watched the power levels drop on his displays, knowing that each percentage point lost brought them closer to the end. The Krell bombardment had not stopped for even a moment. Plasma fire rained down on the colony in a continuous stream of destruction. 3 sections of the settlement were burning now, the fires spreading despite the efforts of emergency teams. The casualty reports kept coming in, and Callas had stopped reading them in detail because the numbers were too painful. 17 dead, 43 wounded. And those numbers would only get worse. Zilla spoke from her communications station, her voice tired and scared. She told Callas that they had received a response to their distress signal. Callas barely looked up from his displays. He told her to thank whoever had responded, but unless they could arrive in the next hour, it would not matter. The shields would fail soon, and after that, the Krell would land their troops, and it would be over. Zilla said something that made Callas turn to look at her. She told him the response said they would be there in 5 minutes. Callas felt confusion before logic took over. 5 minutes was impossible. There were no Union ships within 5 hours of Valrus 9, let alone 5 minutes. It had to be a mistake, a misread signal, or perhaps a cruel joke from the Krell themselves. He started to tell Zillis to check the message again when the sensors began screaming. A ship had just dropped out of hyperspace, directly above the colony. Callas pulled up the visual feed and stared at what he saw. The vessel was smaller than the Krell raiders, sleek and dark with lines that spoke of speed and purpose. The markings on its hull were unfamiliar at first. Then Callas remembered the intelligence briefings from a few months ago. That was the flag of Earth. A human ship had answered their distress call. The human vessel moved like nothing Callas had ever seen. It was fast, impossibly fast, darting through space with maneuvers that should have been beyond any ship that size. Before the Krell could even react to its arrival, the human ship opened fire. Streams of solid metal projectiles shot out from its weapons, moving at speeds that made them nearly invisible. The nearest Krill raider took the full impact of that first salvo. Its shields flashed and failed instantly. And then the hull itself was torn apart as the projectiles punched through armor like it was paper. The raider exploded in a brilliant ball of fire and debris. On the lead Krell vessel, war leader Thrak roared in fury. He was a massive creature, even by Krell standards, covered in thick scales and battle scars from 100 raids. He had been leading attacks on Union colonies for 20 years and had never been seriously challenged. The Union ships always ran or died quickly. But this small vessel had just destroyed one of his raiders in seconds. He shouted orders to his fleet, telling them to destroy the intruder, to show it what happened when someone challenged the Krell. The 11 remaining Krell ships turned their weapons toward the human vessel. Space lit up with plasma fire and missile trails as they poured everything they had at the newcomer. It was enough firepower to destroy a dozen Union ships. But the human vessel was already gone, its engines pushing it through a rolling dive. That took it under the incoming fire and then up through a gap in the Krell formation. Callas watched in amazement as the human ship twisted and turned through space like a dancer, moving in ways that should have torn it apart or crushed its crew under impossible forces. Captain Morgan gripped the armrests of her command. chair as the Valkyrie rolled through another high-speed maneuver. The artificial gravity system struggled to keep up, and she felt the pull of acceleration trying to push her sideways. Around her, the crew worked with calm efficiency, despite the violence of their movements. Morgan asked Bennett for a status report. Bennett told her one Krell ship was down and 11 remained. He was launching missiles now, with target locks on 2 more raiders. The Valkyries miss. Albays opened, and smart weapons streaked out into space. These were not the simple rockets that most Union species used. These were autonomous hunter-killers with their own sensors and decision-making systems, able to dodge defensive fire and adjust their approach in real time. The Krell tried to shoot them down, filling space with defensive plasma, but the missiles weaved through the fire like living things. They slammed into their targets with devastating precision. 2 more Krell raiders vanished in expanding clouds of superheated gas and twisted metal. Bennett noted with satisfaction that the Krell formation was breaking apart. They were not used to prey that fought back like this. They were used to easy victories against ships that could barely defend themselves. This was something entirely different. They did not know how to handle it. But the Krell were not cowards, and they were not defeated yet. Thrak realized he was facing a truly dangerous enemy, and he changed his tactics. He ordered his remaining 9 ships to focus all their fire on a single point, to concentrate their weapons and overwhelm the human vessel through sheer volume of fire. The Krell formation tightened, and space erupted with energy as every weapon on 9 warships fired at the same target. The Valkyrie's shields flared bright. As they absorbed the massive barrage, warning lights flashed red across every console on the bridge. Lieutenant Sarah Webb called out from the engineering station that shields were at 60% and dropping. They could not take many more hits like that, or the shields would fail, and then the armor would start taking damage. Morgan's mind raced through possibilities. They had destroyed 3 Krell ships, but 9 remained, and those 9 were now working together instead of fighting as individuals. The Valkyrie was fast and well-armed, but it was still just 1 ship against 9. She needed to change the equation. To do something the Krell would not expect. She told Bennett to prepare the main cannon and to target the Krell flagship. She wanted full power. Bennett's eyes widened slightly. The main cannon was the Valkyrie's most powerful weapon, particle beam that drew enormous amounts of energy from the ship's reactors. They rarely used it because charging it meant diverting power from other systems, and it took time to build up to full strength. Bennett began the charging sequence and told Morgan they needed 40 seconds. Morgan turned to Palmer at the helm. She told him to give her everything he had and to keep them alive for 40 seconds. Palmer grinned despite the danger around them. He acknowledged the order, and his hands moved across his controls with the skill of someone who had been flying since he was old enough to reach the stick. The Valkyrie danced through space in a desperate ballet of survival. Palmer threw the ship through maneuvers that pushed the limits of what the hull could handle and what the crew could endure. Plasma blasts filled the space around them, some missing by meters, some hitting the shields and making the whole ship shake. Morgan watched the countdown timer tick down while Bennett called out power levels on the main cannon. 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 10 seconds, down on Velrizny. Commander Callis and everyone in the command center watched the battle with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The human ship was outnumbered 9-1, but it refused to run. It dodged and weaved through fire that should have destroyed it 10 times over, returning shot for shot. Moving with a grace and speed that seemed to defy the laws of physics, Bennett announced that the main cannon was ready. Morgan gave the order to fire. A lance of blue-white energy erupted from the Valkyrie's bow, crossing the distance to Thrak's flagship in less than a heartbeat. The beam was so bright that it hurt to look at directly. It hit the Krell flagship's shields and simply went through them like they were not there. The particle beam cord, the massive warship from bow to stern, drilling through armor and bulkheads and vital systems. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The flagship continued on its course as if nothing had changed. Then the internal explosions began. The ship came apart in sections, splitting along the path the beam had carved. Secondary explosions blossoming throughout its length. What had been the pride of the Krell fleet became a spreading field of wreckage and bodies. The remaining 8 Krell ships suddenly hesitated. Their formation wavered. These were warriors who lived for battle and conquest, who had raided and killed for years without fear. But they had never faced anything like this human vessel. They had lost 5 ships in less than 20 minutes to a single enemy. Their war leader was dead. The easy raid had become a nightmare. Bennett reported that the remaining Krell ships were breaking off. All 8 were jumping to hyperspace, running away as fast as their engines could carry them. Morgan allowed herself a small smile. She told Bennett to let them go. They had learned their lesson, and they would spread the word. She told Hayes to send a message to the colony and tell them the threat had been eliminated and they were safe. Now, the battle was over. Commander Callis stood on the landing platform as the human shuttle descended from orbit. The small craft touched down gently, its engines cycling down to idle as the hatch opened. Captain Morgan stepped out first, followed by several of her officers. Callis had expected the humans to be impressive, perhaps tall and heavily muscled like the warrior species he had studied. Instead, he saw a woman of average height, with brown hair and calm green eyes. She wore a dark blue uniform with rank insignia on her shoulders, and she moved with quiet confidence as she approached him. Callis performed the formal Rinthian bow. Lowering his head and crossing his arms over his chest, he told Captain Morgan that on behalf of Velrus 9 and the Galactic Union, he offered their deepest gratitude. She had saved over 2,000 lives today. Morgan returned his gesture with a respectful nod. She said they were just doing their duty and that the mutual defense charter applied to all members of the Union. Callis struggled to find the right words. He told her that what she had done was beyond duty. A single ship against 12 Krell raiders was not just brave, it was something he had never seen in 40 years of studying warfare. Her tactics, her weapons, the speed of her ship, all of it was like watching legends come to life. He had to know how humanity had developed such capabilities. Morgan's expression became thoughtful. She said the Krell were bullies who had gotten used to easy victories against colonies that could not fight back. They were not prepared for real opposition. Callis invited her and her officers to tour the colony to see the damage and the lives they had saved. As they walked through the settlement, past the burn sections and the makeshift medical stations, Morgan answered his questions. She explained that humans had been fighting wars for their entire history. Their home world had seen countless conflicts, each one driving innovation in weapons and tactics and strategy. They had developed railgun technology over a century ago, using magnetic acceleration to fire projectiles at incredible speeds. Their missiles had been refined through generations of arms races and combat experience. Their ship designs prioritized speed and maneuverability because they had learned long ago that a moving target was harder to hit than a stationary one. Callis pointed out that humanity had only been in space for a few hundred years. Most species took thousands of years to develop the kind of military technology the Valkyrie possessed. How had humans advanced so quickly? Morgan's expression grew somber. She said humans had strong motivation. When your species fights among itself as much as theirs did, you either innovate or die. They chose to innovate. Every war taught them new lessons, and every lesson was written in blood. They learned or they perished. They reached the medical center where the wounded were being treated. Doctors from 3 different species worked side by side, saving lives. Morgan stopped to speak with some of the injured colonists, asking how they were doing, offering words of encouragement. Callis watched her interact with his people and realized something important. These humans were not just warriors. They cared about the people they protected. That combination of deadly skill and genuine compassion was rare in the galaxy. As the Valkyrie prepared to depart, Callis made sure all the sensor data from the battle was preserved and transmitted to Union Central Command. The galaxy needed to know what had happened at Velrus 9. The footage was clear and detailed, showing every moment of the engagement from multiple angles. Within days, the recordings had spread. Through every communication network in the Union, every member species watched the same incredible sequence of events, The footage showed the human ship dropping out of hyperspace and immediately opening fire. It showed the first Krell raider exploding under the impact of railgun fire. It showed the Valkyrie moving through impossible maneuvers, dodging plasma fire that should have destroyed it. It showed missiles that moved like living things, weaving through defensive fire to strike their targets. It showed the main cannon firing, that brilliant beam of light that had cored the Krell flagship and ended the battle. People watched it over and over, unable to believe what they were seeing. On the Union capital world of Nexus Prime, the High Council convened an emergency session. Chancellor Vex was an elderly Heptaran who had led the council for 30 years. He had seen many things in his long life, but the battle footage from Vel Riznan troubled him deeply. He watched it 5 times before calling the coup Ensel to order. He told the assembled leaders that this changed everything about how they understood the balance of power in the galaxy. Counselor Dren was a Korthon, a species known for strategic thinking and military analysis. He reported that according to human sources, the capabilities shown by the Valkyrie were standard for their military vessels. If that was true, then humanity might possess the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, despite having fewer than 50 ships. The technology gap between human warships and Union vessels was enormous. Counselor Myra was a crystalline being whose species communicated through light patterns. She pointed out that the Krell had terrorized Union colonies for 200 years. The Union had tried everything to stop them, building better defenses, increasing patrols, negotiating with neighboring powers. Nothing had worked. The Krell always found weak targets and always escaped before Union forces could respond. One human ship had destroyed 3 Krell raiders and driven off 9 more in less than 20 minutes. That single engagement had done more damage to the Krell than the Union had managed in decades. Vex asked the question that was on everyone's mind. What did they really know about Earth? What kind of species produced warriors like Captain Morgan and her crew? The Council accessed every file they had on humanity. What they found was both fascinating and disturbing. Earth's history was a continuous story of warfare. Humans had fought with primitive weapons, then advanced to firearms, then to weapons that could destroy entire cities. They had waged war on every part of their planet, on land and sea, and in the air. Their culture was saturated with military tradition and warrior mythology. Dren observed that humans were fundamentally different from species like the Krell. The Krell fought for plunder and glory. They were raiders who took what they wanted from the weak. But humans fought for ideas, for survival, for each other. War was woven into their culture not as a game or a way to get rich, but as a serious and often tragic necessity. That made them far more dangerous than simple raiders. Counselor Mira asked if the Union should be concerned. Humanity was clearly the most militarily powerful species they had encountered. If humans were so warlike, could they pose a threat to the Union itself? The council chamber fell silent as everyone considered this question. Vex thought carefully before answering. He pointed out that Captain Morgan had no obligation to respond. To the distress signal from Velris 9, humanity was so new to the Union that most species would have understood if they stayed out of conflicts that did not directly concern them. But Morgan came anyway. She risked her ship and her crew to save people she had never met, people from species she barely knew. That said something important about human character. He continued by noting that the battle footage showed something else beyond just military power. The Valkyrie could have simply destroyed all 12 Krell ships. It had the firepower to do so. But once the remaining raiders tried to flee, Morgan let them go. She did not pursue them for revenge or to ensure total victory. She stopped fighting the moment the threat was eliminated. That showed restraint and discipline. Vex made his decision and stated it clearly to the council. He did not think they should fear the humans. He thought they should thank the stars that humanity was on their side, and they should make absolutely certain that humans remained allies of the Union. Council needed to reach out to Earth's government and begin serious discussions about humanity's role in galactic affairs. The other counselors agreed. Messages were sent to Earth requesting formal talks about military cooperation and mutual defense. The Union wanted to understand human capabilities better. More importantly, it wanted to ensure that this powerful new species remained friendly. As the council session ended, X looked out at the stars through the great windows of the council chamber. Somewhere out there, human ships were patrolling the darkness, keeping watch over colonies and trade routes. The galaxy had changed. For 200 years, the Krell had raided with impunity because no one could stop them. Now someone could. Now someone had. The word would spread quickly through the criminal elements and Raider clans that operated in Union space. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, and they had announced their presence not with words or diplomacy, but with the kind of demonstration that every species in the galaxy could understand. They had shown that they would defend the innocent and that they had the power to back up that commitment. The galaxy would never be quite the same. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Velrus 9, and the galaxy looked very different now. The Krell had tested human resolve 3 more times in the weeks following that first encounter. Each time ended the same way, with Krell ships burning in space and the survivors fleeing as fast as their engines could carry them. After the third defeat, the Krell clans held a gathering of their war leaders. They made a decision that would have seemed impossible just months before. Human ships were to be avoided at all costs. Any raid on a colony that might attract human attention was forbidden. For the first time in 200 years, Krell attacks on Union colonies dropped to almost nothing. Other predatory species took notice of what had happened. The Scarix were pirates who operated in the Western Spiral Arm. The Ven Collective were slavers who raided primitive worlds. The Harath Dominion were conquerors who had been slowly expanding into Union territory for decades. All of them had ignored Union protests and warnings because they knew the Union had no real power to stop them. But now there was something new in the galaxy. There was a species that would respond to distress calls that had the military power to destroy raider fleets, and that seemed willing to travel anywhere to protect the innocent. The criminals and raiders who had operated freely for so long suddenly became much more cautious. Captain Lisa Morgan stood on the bridge of her new flagship and looked out at the stars. She had been promoted to Commodore after Velrus 9, given command of a full squadron of 12 human warships. The TCS Destiny was twice the size of the Valkyrie and carried enough firepower to take on a small fleet. Her squadron patrolled the most dangerous regions of Union space, the frontier areas where raiders had operated with impunity for generations. In 6 months, they had responded to 14 distress calls and engaged hostile forces 8 times. They had not lost a single ship or failed to save a single colony. Lieutenant Jake Hayes was still her communications officer, having transferred with her to the Destiny. He looked up from his console now and told her they were receiving a transmission from Union Central Command. Chancellor Vex himself was calling. Morgan straightened her uniform and told Hayes to put it on the main screen. The elderly Heptaran's face appeared, his features warm with genuine respect and affection. Vex congratulated her on her promotion and told her that Earth should be proud of what she and her crew had accomplished. Morgan thanked him and asked how she could help. Vex explained that the High Council had been discussing humanity's role in the Union for months now. The debates had been long and sometimes heated, but they had finally reached a decision. He wanted to propose a formal arrangement between Earth and the Galactic Union. Morgan listened carefully as Vex outlined the Council's proposal. Humanity would become the Union's primary military force, responsible for training other species in modern combat tactics and responding to major threats against any Union member. Human ships would have authority to patrol anywhere in Union space and to engage hostile forces without waiting for approval from local governments. In exchange, Earth would gain full voting rights in the High Council, the same status as the founding members of the Union. Humanity would also receive preferred trade, agreements with all member species, and access to resources and technologies that were normally restricted to senior members. Vex paused, and his expression became serious. He told Morgan there would be resistance to this proposal. Some species were uncomfortable with how quickly humans had risen to prominence in galactic affairs. They feared human power and worried about what humanity might do with the authority the Council was offering. There were concerns that humans might become tyrants or conquerors, using their military strength to dominate weaker species. Morgan chose her words carefully. She told Vex that humans did not want to rule the galaxy. They just wanted to protect it. Too many species out here saw kindness as weakness and peace as an invitation to attack. Someone needed to show them they were wrong. Someone needed to stand between the raiders and the innocent, between the strong and the weak. Humanity could be that someone because they understood the cost of war better than most species. They knew what it meant to fight and die, and that knowledge made them reluctant warriors, but effective ones. Vex smiled and said that was exactly why the Council needed humanity. The galaxy had been at the mercy of raiders and warlords for too long. Most Union species had forgotten how to fight or had never learned in the first place. They had built a civilization based on trade and cooperation and peaceful coexistence, which was admirable. But predators did not respect peaceful intentions. They respected strength and the will to use it. Humanity understood something that most Union species had forgotten over millennia of peace. Sometimes peace must be defended with force. The transmission ended, and Morgan sat quietly, or a moment thinking about what had just happened. Commander Jack Bennett approached her chair. He had also transferred with her to the Destiny, serving as her second-in-command. He asked what she thought about the Council's proposal, and whether humanity was ready for such a responsibility. Morgan looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there, families were sleeping safely because human ships patrolled the darkness. Children were growing up without fear of raiders. Colonies were building and growing instead of burning. She thought about Valrus 9 and the 2,000 people who would have died if the Valkyrie had not answered their call. She thought about all the other colonies they had saved in the months since then. She said that humanity had spent thousands of years fighting each other on Earth. They had waged wars over land and resources and ideas and religions. They knew the cost of conflict better than anyone in the galaxy. Maybe that was exactly why they were the right choice to prevent it. They did not glorify war or seek it out. They knew it was terrible and tragic. But they also knew that sometimes it was necessary to stand against those who would harm the innocent. Bennett said it had a certain logic to it. The galaxy's protectors. Morgan shook her head and corrected him. They were not protectors, she said. They were guarantors. They guaranteed that kindness was not weakness. They guaranteed that peace was not the same as surrender. They guaranteed that when someone sent a distress signal into the darkness, someone would answer. In the weeks that followed, Earth's government accepted the Council's proposal. Humanity became the Union's military arm, responsible for the defense of over 1,000 worlds and countless trillions of beings. The human fleet grew from 50 ships to over 200 as Earth's shipyards worked around the clock. Young men and women from every nation on Earth joined the Space Corps. Eager to be part of something larger than themselves, stories began to spread through the galaxy. Stories of human ships appearing out of nowhere when colonies were under attack. Stories of raiders fleeing at the mere sight of Earth's flag. Stories of impossible rescues and unlikely victories. The species of the galaxy, who had spent millennia believing that survival meant being either predator or prey, began to understand that there was a third option. You could be a guardian. On Valrus 9. Commander Kalaz had retired from active military service, but stayed on as the colony's historian. He spent his days recording everything that had happened, making sure future generations would understand how close they had come to destruction and who had saved them. His assistant asked him what they should call the memorial they were building to honor those who had died in the Krell attack. Callus thought about that day. 6 months ago, when hope had seemed lost, he thought about the sleek human warship dropping out of hyperspace like a miracle made real. He thought about Captain Morgan and her crew who had risked everything to save people they had never met. He told his assistant to call it what it was. The day a distress signal was sent, and what arrived changed everything. The memorial was built in the center of the colony. A tall structure of white stone that caught the light of Velriston's sun. The inscription was simple and direct, carved in a dozen languages so that every species could read it. It said that on this day, the colony learned that humanity does not ask if they should help. They ask how fast they can arrive. Across the galaxy, in 1,000 different languages, in 1,000,000 different conversations, a new phrase entered common usage. When people were in desperate need, when hope seemed lost, when darkness threatened to overwhelm the light, they would say the same thing: send for the humans. Because everyone knew the truth now. The humans would come. They always came. They would drop out of hyperspace with weapons ready and courage in their hearts. They would stand between danger and the innocent. They would fight against impossible odds because it was the right thing to do. The galaxy had found its guardians. And those guardians wore the flag of Earth,